But when it comes to Transnistria, another example of those are the two major examples that I can think of consciously. There are others, but those are the ones I can think of most consciously that represent kind of like these unacknowledged worlds. They're just culture worlds, all their own. And what Our Lady Amy says, I certainly take what she's saying as true. Probably the photographers who go into Transnistria will, if they're on some kind of mission to kind of just fuck it all up and just try and claim that it doesn't exist, they'll make certain all the photographs they take are of empty areas. And any place you go to in the world, you can find certain parts of the day or certain areas, either certain times of the day they'll be empty or certain areas are always empty. You'll be able to find those anywhere. If they concentrate on just photographing places like that, they'll probably convince everybody nothing's here and kind of like there's nothing to see here and just to go away. They might even be encouraged to do that with the help of the local government. The local government is really not necessarily seeking tourism. But then because tourism is the closest to free money that anybody gets, then yeah, oftentimes most people don't mind tourism. Of course, there's times when cultures become very security conscious, and then they'll kind of discourage tourism. But other than that, it's I think that people have been traveling to Transnistria in and out for a while. Maybe that's kind of come to a stop with the Ukrainian war. That would make sense to me. By the way, anybody heard that ringtone? Sort of, that was just a reminder for my dental cleaning at 11:20 or 11:40 in the morning. But for what it's worth, this is a renegade Soviet satellite statelet. It is effectively the Soviet Union's Taiwan. In other words, just as the Nationalist Republic of China reestablished itself on Taiwan, the Greater Soviet Union reestablished its exile government in Transnistria. So just understand that. In the old days when I was on Facebook, I published an entire photo album of Transnistria, and there were plenty of people in that photo album. But I'd have to look up for those photos again to share them, and I would only be able to share them, say for instance, with people here in my on my call, whoever's on call, and I could put in their private, messages and what maybe Amy and
Yeah.
okay.
Okay,
Now,
I'm watching.
Aristides, before I take us on this little journey, Aristides, do you remember anything about Transnistria at all, or know anything
Uh,
about it?
I do know what it is.
Okay.
It's kind of its little breakaway region. So
Okay.
it's like a disputed region, right?
Kind of. So one of the major reasons for the Ukrainian war, there's many factors. One of the factors was that Vladimir Putin desperately wanted to physically link up with Transnistria because he's very, very scared of Transnistria. He is as afraid of Transnistria as the communist Chinese on the mainland are afraid of my Taiwan. And the reason for that is because all Germany has to do, or the European Union, but primarily United Germany as the center of European Union, all they have to do is declare we recognize Transnistria as the legitimate legal government of Russia, because Transnistria is the Soviet Union in exile. So since the Soviet Union is in exile in Transnistria, right now it's unrecognized, just the way my Taiwan is unrecognized by the United Nations.
Interesting.
And they are the only people who maintain passports with a hammer and sickle on it in this day and age. Nobody in the world has the passport with a hammer and sickle. So this is Transnistria. So if you look up Transnistria, there is information. Look, there's people. Look, there's some people, and here's people in Transnistria. Let's see if we can find them here. And I'll go a bit into. So here's some people in Transnistria. There you go. These are people in Transnistria.
They don't, but they don't even look irradiated.
No,
They don't look like they.
it's an interesting point.
Nuclear catastrophe?
What Amy brings up is the fact that Transnistria is referenced as the Burning Protectorate. It is called the Burning Protectorate because it was supposedly in the fallout zone of Chernobyl. But this was kind of like a myth that was created so that people wouldn't go there. But the leader of the country did survive a nuclear meltdown. That is the point that I will bring up, and why it has a kind of mythical status. Nobody ever sees the leader of Transnistria. Certainly not the man behind the curtain. And there is a reason for that. At this point, he's no longer really human. He's like a completely altered body of cybernetic components that is the old Soviet make. So here are Transnistria, the motherland, doesn't want you right now. See Russia, the motherland means Russia. So Transnistria, Russia doesn't want you right now. This is because they're Soviet and they represent the old Soviet Union. And Vladimir Putin wants power only for himself. If the Soviet Union were recognized, he would be fired because the Soviet Union would consider him the head of a personality cult. This poor guy's got an acne problem. That might be a result of radioactive fallout. But at any rate, so you can find some articles like this. But again, you'll notice in all of them, no one ever shows the leader. Who's the fucking leader of Transnistria? And he's never shown. Never. And every once in a while, you'll see like somebody who's like a representative or a mouthpiece. But you never see the leader. And the leader, of course, I'll try and find an illustration of him because they used to make illustrations or paintings of him, but it would be difficult. So here's some other people in Transnistria. So you see the old Soviet uniforms, the little girl being raised, of course, in that environment. And it's it's got its own little fucking world. I mean, and so I'll go a bit into its history now, and just for both of you while you're conscious and with myself, understand that basically when the Soviet Union began to fragment, what happened was that Moldova, which was of course a kind of one of the breakaway republics, it effectively had independence thrust upon it. And a growing sense of nationalism saw a number of new laws proposed, including a motion to make Moldovan the new nation's official language. Now, understand that Moldova, they're Romanian. They're ethnically Romanian, but they use the Cyrillic alphabet of the Russians. Whereas Romania proper, Greater Romania, they use the Latin alphabet of the old Roman Empire. So they're both ethnically the same, but they're divided by culture. And what happened was when Moldova decided to make Moldovan the only official language, the Russians broke away and they started their own little breakaway republic across the Dniester River, hence the name Transnistria. And this self-declared nation became known as the Burning Protectorate because of supposedly being in the fallout of Chernobyl, which it actually was not. All the wind blew the radiation towards Europe. And so the territory was trying to keep tourists away because the Soviets were basically relocating there the old party members so that they would not be executed or prosecuted for crimes. And then in that place, you've got over 2 million souls who toil as unto serfs, and they serve the Protectorate's military-industrial complex. Which is ruled tyrannically by a man who's only referenced in whispers as the Kometsgar, a combination of comet and Khazar, meaning Tsar, the Tsar. And so the Kometsar, the state palace he calls home, they brutally dispatch any internal unrest among the unfortunate populace of his rogue nation through a highly efficient secret police force called the Zvezdnoy Verdi, or Gvardi, the Stellar Guard. And so the Zvezdnoy Gvardi, or Stellar Guard, they're composed of the Kometskar's most trusted agents, and they form the nucleus of a militarized police state. And even though they're armed with less advanced technology than Western special forces, they remain a potential threat to anyone who ventures into their homeland or intervenes with their machinations abroad. In keeping with his contempt for humanity, the Kametsgar considers all of his minions expendable. But there's certain things that are strange about Transnistria. Most members of the Zvezdnoi Gvarde, they're disenfranchised former Soviet agents, ironically right-wing veterans of the wars in Eastern Europe, a lot of skilled international mercenaries who have run out of places to hide, and in return for their unwavering loyalty, they live as barons, basically free to do as they please on lands bestowed to them by the Kametsgar. Now, the downtrodden subjects live in constant fear of interrogation. They are not free to travel. They're provided little access to media from the outside world, if any. But nevertheless, all the citizens are adequately fed, sheltered, and cared for by the state, because there's so fewer people to take care of and so much less to work with in terms of this incredible amount of sprawl that the Soviet Union used to have. The old Soviet nomenclatura, or the intellectuals of the Communist Party, can actually make things work here to a degree in terms of collectivized sharing. And intriguingly, the aged receive some of the finest care in the world. They have an elite cast of people from the former Soviet Union who are not getting any younger, so they have the finest senior care of almost any place on earth. Aside from that, what's that, Amy?
It does parallel over to Taiwan having so many progressive assets as far as like the gender equity.
Yes.
The fact that they honor their elderly in Transnistria, although I've never met anybody from Transnistria, which just, lends to how secret the place is. Like, people aren't allowed to travel. Like, you're not gonna show up in some major metropolitan area and meet a bunch of people who've come over from Transnistria. Like, they're just there.
Yeah.
They're not everywhere. They're just there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so people understand that Mon Ami has a very good memory. What she's remembering is that about 3 years after the official commencement of the Soviet nuclear program, circa 1957, there was a serious nuclear explosion that occurred at the Proizvodstvennoy, I think. That would be, it's the Russian word Mayak was, I think, the name of the plant. It transliterates as lighthouse. And at the Mayak, the lighthouse nuclear fuel processing plant in Proizvodstvennoy, or Vodstvennoy, Proizvodstvennoy. That was the name of the area. And that's still today one of the largest nuclear facilities in the post-Soviet Union, the modern Russia. It houses plutonium production reactors, aside the reprocessing plant. And the nuclear complex is located about 72 kilometers. That'd be about 93 miles northwest of the city of, I think it was Chelyabinsk. And Chelyabinsk city, that's in the Ural Mountains region. It's on the border between Europe and Asia in terms of Siberia and European Russia. But thousands of square miles were contaminated by that accident. It caused the entire province to be closed to all foreigners until 1992, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. From 1957 until a year after the Soviet Union collapsed, any foreigner would be shot on sight. Now, the calamity at Chelyabinsk was the first time the Russians had to deal with a nuclear incident. It most certainly would not be the last. Now, the last one, thus far, was the Tomsk 7 catastrophe. Now, seemingly born to deal with both was an individual who was never gifted a Christian name, at least one that was ever known to the general public. He was birthed of an unknown mother who died delivering him amid the mass evacuation of that first nuclear meltdown. And the individual was codenamed Plemia, or literally flame or blaze. He came into this world out of a womb thoroughly saturated with the very Roentgens emitted from the meltdown of the Mayak, the lighthouse facility that killed his biological mother, among so many others. Himself apparently born immune to the effects of massive radioactivation. And contextually, basically, it was credited to the evolutionary events of the Tunguska meteorite. That's what Stalin believed when he was alive. He felt that back in the 30th day of the 6th month of, what was it, the 1908th year of our Lord, 1908, over a century ago by now, that I think it was then he felt that Russians were impacted by the crash of that meteorite and rendered a different race, that their very genetics were altered by what was emitted by that Tunguska blast. Certainly Plemia, the flame or the blaze, he was but one of many among tens of thousands of parahuman mutants born over the decades in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. That's
That bears repeating.
I'm sorry, honey?
Could you just repeat that for everybody's sake about
So Stalin
blast?
Stalin was convinced that in 1908, when the Tunguska blast occurred that flattened miles of forest in Siberia, a patently obvious nuclear blast from the comet exploding before it hit the Earth. And there's a conflation of events that take place here. They led ultimately to the destruction of the life or the loss of opportunity for Nikola Tesla, because Nikola Tesla was active in the United States. He was dating the daughter of J.P. Morgan, and she was going to change his entire life. She was going to give him an opportunity to change the world with wireless power, wireless energy. And the man who was going to finance him financed that Wycliffe Tower, or Wardenclyffe Tower. And what happened was, when the comet was spotted, the Tunguska event is named after the comet, I believe, or maybe the comet was never given a name. But when it was spotted heading towards the Earth, it was on a trajectory to plow into Moscow and would have eliminated Russia as a world power effectively through the 20th and into the 21st century. It would have wiped out Moscow. And Tesla intervened. He turned on all the power at Wardenclyffe, and he neutralized the bolide by disintegrating it in midair. There's no other reason that it would have blown before it hit the Earth. Tesla claimed the credit for that, but all of that was hidden by J.P. Morgan because he was so incensed, so enraged, that Tesla did not tell him the tower was operational. Tesla kept that from him. Tesla was obviously playing games with J.P. Morgan, where he was going to make the tower operational and claim credit for it himself in some kind of stunt, whereas J.P. Morgan was paying for it all. He had every right to be angry, and he was angry at not being consulted. There was enough time between the comet being identified and Tesla turning on the tower for J.P. Morgan to be notified. He was not brought into the decision. Tesla wanted to be the hero all by himself, and therefore J.P. Morgan forbade his daughter to continue seeing Tesla. This, of course, destroyed Tesla's future. And more than anything else he had ever done, this wiped out his potential for helping mankind. What happened at that point was he had saved a nation, but was unable to take any credit for it because the man who was sponsoring him made certain that the news was scrubbed. Such being said, the comet itself destroyed an enormous part of the Siberian forest. Stalin dispatched an expedition decades later to identify the phenomenon or try to research it. The expedition came across many anomalous phenomena that have never made it to the public. They were completely kept secret by the Soviet Union. We never found out about any of it until that brief moment in time when the Soviet Union collapsed and Yeltsin declassified all documents, and then Putin came in power and reclassified everything again. So what little was released was that it became understood that Stalin was convinced that the Russian people were biologically changed by the fallout from that comet blowing in the atmosphere. This is not an illogical conclusion because the fallout from the comet blowing up before it hit the ground made certain that the dispersal of its debris in terms of particulate matter was far wider than the impact zone created by its explosion. This means that the impact zone was powerful enough to take down mile after mile of forest. The particulate matter that must have blown from the comet, which blew up in midair, literally was blown all over Russia. So, for this reason, Russia began to manifest parahuman mutations, people with gifted psychic powers in particular, and this is why the Soviets became the undisputed leader in psychic warfare throughout the Cold War, what I say should be known as the Third World War in effect. So hopefully people can understand what I'm saying with that. Now, because this individual, Plamia, who was born after the aftermath of that meltdown, was demonstrably capable of withstanding levels of radiation fatal to any baseline human specimen, the Plamia, the blazing flame as he would be known in the code files or the coded files of the United States, he was raised what the Soviets would call a secret geroi, a secret hero of the Zhelvezhsky state, the Soviet state, a primary asset of the secret Soviet space program, repeatedly traversing the Van Allen radiation belt with impunity on hard vacuum assignments against the Americans in support of his people's covert armada of armed and armored military salutes, the first space stations of any kind. So people understand this. Everybody heard of Mir, M-Y-R. Mir is the Russian word for world, and it was a space station that was up in space forever. Everybody heard of Mir. Nobody seemed to know that there were many military Mirs, dozens of them, that were armed and armored. Everybody just paid attention to their civilian space station, as opposed to the secret Soviet space stations that were militarized. So he would often operate under conditions of suited. He was in a vacuum suit, but he was in suited exposure to direct solar rads that would have seared his comrades and arms alive. Nevertheless, the toll of mechanical, in disambiguation from radiological insults to his body, first off, he became overexposed to weightlessness. So every time he came back to Earth, the calcium loss in his bones would render his bones too brittle to walk in the heavy gravity of Earth. Eventually, his limbs were replaced with mechanical limbs. Gradually, these primitive, comparatively primitive, but extremely durable cybernetic augmentations rendered the Plamia's morphological appearance ever more disturbing. He became less and less of a man and more of a machine. Per what information was acquired, it was evident that knowing no other life than that of a cosmonaut, a cosmonautical combatant, the Plamia was entirely accepting of both physiologically and psychologically, accepting of his prosthetic enhancements. They doubled his height, Since he was 6 feet tall, he now stands at 12 feet high. He's permanently encased in an endoskeletal support so he can withstand the gravity of Earth. Of course, it helped him maintain his survivability in space as well, preventing his zero-gravity decalcified bones from breaking from, well, when abiding what was for himself the oppressive gravitational pull of Earth whenever he suffers to stride upon it, as he perforce must do so for the foreseeable future. The thing is, of course, that on fall of the Soviet Union, the individual originally known only as the Plamia, he did not flicker out gently into that good night. There were small splinter cells of the Soviet government that believed that with the collaboration of the Russian Communist Empire's numerous metahumans, these mutants, these human mutations of extraordinary functionality apparent throughout the Soviet Union, they all, again, tracing this back to the evolutionary demarcator of the Tunguska mutation event, as the Soviets called it, the military could seize power and stem the collapse. Now, basically what happened was that he was considered the potential savior of godless communism in its hour of eclipse, kind of like Smedley Butler was considered the potential for a military coup d'etat in the United States. And of course, for his own part, the Plamia was fiercely loyal to his government sponsors, having been coddled by the state literally since his birth. There were many of these mutants who really didn't like their government. Many of the hardliners in the government thought that the Plamia was too attached to fame. They felt that he was someone who was a glory hound, but he was really known only to his peers and compatriots. The people on the streets knew nothing about him. That's the paradox of a secret hero in the Soviet Union. When the Plamia helped the attempted coup d'etat to restore the Soviet Union, and when they put Yeltsin under siege, he displayed a disturbing affinity for destruction. Because of the grave and complicated political ramifications, only a handful of these metahuman or human mutants followed him in seizure and mobilization of his nuclear-armed forces. It almost turned into the world's first nuclear civil war. Now, aside from this, farcically, he was popularly totally unknown. The world teetered on the edge of cataclysm, and his first and last public standoff was solved diplomatically with surprisingly little bloodshed. An incident that was somewhat analogous to that of Japan's Yukio Mishima. Anybody can look up Mishima. And Yukio Mishima was a Japanese man who tried to conduct a coup d'etat in Japan and wound up killing himself because the Japanese army laughed at him like he was a samurai out of an old cinema film. And so he committed suicide and shamed and disgraced them into some level of coming into consciousness again, aware of their heritage and their legacy that they were meant to represent. When it came to the Plamia, a different culture, his defeat marked only the beginning of a descent into darkness, really. The blazing flame, again his code name as the Americans understood it, he disappeared into this self-imposed internal exprisonment, as the Soviets used to call it. He would consult unofficially among the cosmodromes, the spaceports, of the post-Soviet Central Asian republics. These were once the busiest spaceports in the world, and they maintained that reputation because the Americans closed down their space shuttle program and they had to rely on the Russians to get to the International Space Station for years. The Plamia was one of the men who made that possible. Nobody ever knew it. But he burned brightly once again in another blaze of glory, if you will, when he made an unexpected heroic appearance at the Tomsk 7 nuclear complex. in the closed city of Seversk. That's in the Tomskaya Oblast, the Tomsk federal subject region. Now, Seversk was what was known as a Teni Gorod, a secret city in the Soviet Union, until Russia's president, their first president, Boris Yeltsin, decreed in 1992 that such cities should resume their historical names. Now, the town appeared on no official maps until then, as was the standardized modus operandi with Soviet towns containing secret facilities. Tomsk 7 is actually a P.O. box number. It implied the site was located some distance from the city of Tomsk. And for many years, the residents had restrictions on their ability to come and go from the city. Upon leaving Seversk, the residents had to surrender their entry passes at the checkpoints and were forbidden from discussing where they worked or lived. Now, circa 1987, some restrictions had to be lifted due to the sheer number of residents who now worked or studied in Tomsk. In April of 1993, a tank exploded while being cleaned with nitric acid, and this explosion caused a cloud of radioactive gas to be released into the atmosphere. The incident was so serious that Time magazine identified the Tomsk 7 explosion as one of the world's worst nuclear disasters. Now, in an attempt to avoid an even greater nuclear holocaust than Chernobyl, well, the Plamia penetrated the now destabilized core of the nuclear power plant, exploiting both his prosthetically enhanced frame and intrinsic radio immunity to manipulate controls via transmitted communications and thereby contain an imminent meltdown. And while he struggled in that underground facility, the regional Russian officers were bickering in their closed staterooms. The former Empire of Nations had suffered terribly from the dire effects of Chernobyl in the neighboring Ukraine, and the reactor's proximity to the heavily populated city of Seversk forced everyone to fear the worst. So the local officials decided to bury the reactor site under a haphazard bunker of steel and concrete, entombing the man known only as the Blazing Flame within the contaminated facility. Now, despite being buried under 36 tonnes, 40 tons of radioactive dust, the Plamia had access to all the stores of a recently operational complex, routinely accommodating scores of technicians and support staff at any given time, and the internal floor plans provided him tunnel egresses that ultimately enabled his escape via a poorly barricaded aperture within nearly half a year's span of time. The man known as the Flame blazed silently, purposefully evading use of radio transception, no transmissions, no receptions, while seething over what he perceived as the ultimate betrayal. But for 5 months, the intense radiation twisted his mind as well as his body, seemingly awakening latent psionic abilities, even as he gathered explosive materials to expedite his breakout. He acquired a form of ability to apparently, influence people that people never saw him display before. So come around August or September of 1993, the Russian scientists detected anomalous energy fluctuations at the Tomsk 7 plant site. And preparing for the worst, the government deployed a large specialized military force. They really shouldn't have bothered. A section of the facility's steel and concrete sarcophagus shattered in an explosion massive enough to destroy a quarter of the amassed forces. And a half-mechanized monstrosity, the former Plamia, emerged, demanding the Russian soldiers present him their arms in salute and recognize him as the Tsar. Join him or die. punctuating the order by blowing other internally placed charges that sundered the remaining bunkered structure and exposed the now inert reactor site to open air once again. The survivors immediately surrendered and marched with the mechanical mutant who now proclaimed himself the Kommissar of the burning protectorate of Transnistria. Now, despite the Yeltsinite order removing Seversk's secret status, the city of Seversk still remains closed to all non-residents. The city has 6 checkpoints where visitors must display entry documents. Permission to visit the city may only be granted by the appropriate authorities through the institution being visited, or through a private party such as a close relation. Prior May of 2007, the last time I myself checked into the area's accessibility, no visitors have ever applied for entry passes at the special office in Tomsk. Ever. And with the world's protest being received, all the world's protests about his formation of a microstatelet being received as little more than annoyances, the Kommissar has established himself as the conqueror of a well-defended state. The Shuzheny Protectorat Pridnistrovye, astride the Transnistrian riverbank betwixt eastern Moldavia and western Ukraine. Neither regional government can muster the unconventional forces necessary to depose the autocrat. In addition to his own incredible power as a cyberneticized mutation, the Kommissar fields a formidable conventional army composed of local thugs and mercenaries from the Balkans to the southeast. And he frequently offers sanctuary to the world's most loathsome criminals. Now, in terms of the profile analysis that I worked with when I worked with the Department of Defense, the files they had amassed on him before a lot of this even took place, he was considered callous and flamboyant, but sincere in his attempts to fulfill his obligations as a secret heroi, a secret hero. He strove to please his superiors. His honorable defeat by diplomatic stratagem forced him to confront his greater responsibility to the world. That was a spirit that manifested itself in his intervention at Tomsk 7. Today, he bears a staggering hatred of humanity for his people's fearful abandonment of him. In his greatest moment of heroism, he was left to contemplate that bitter moment for 5 months in a horrid toxic tone, while undergoing nerve-shattering psychic mutations. It's warped him irrevocably. He's a former hero who's emotionally destroyed. He views himself now as beyond human. He seeks nothing less than to dominate man under his heel. He's deeply misanthropic. He barely tolerates his human minions. There's a post-traumatic storm that's been brewing within him, his only outlet for this fury being annihilation of his enemies. He's governed by anger. He endures no insult. He demands utter subservience. Any perceived insolence sends him into a berserker rage. In such a state, he's destroyed his palatial estate on more than one occasion, and they've had to rebuild it or relocate him. Though he's not particularly cruel by nature, he doesn't hesitate to deliver the most heinous and painful end to those he believes have wronged him. When he's at his most calm, the Kommissar is a brooding and deeply isolated figure. The months spent smoldering inside the reactor core have tempered his spirit. They've hardened his heart. His bitterness and strength of resolve have made him superhumanly tough in body and mind. They've obliterated any sense of human compassion. Of course, were he a wiser man, he might strive to reinvigorate the Zelvetsky space program and in objective of seeking peace above the skies, forever looking down upon those literally beneath him in orbit around the Earth. But something keeps him tethered here, and tragically he's grown too accustomed to the poison whispers of sycophantic underlings, and he would never again subject himself to the terrible isolation that he felt inside the reactor core. He's as pitiful as any of his subjects. And Vladimir Putin is more frightened of him than anything else on Earth. Vladimir Putin seeks to invade Transnistria and destroy the Plemia. That was one of his motivations for invading Ukraine. If the European Union again declares the Commissar as the rightful heir to the Soviet Union and recognizes the former Soviet Union as once again the legitimate government of Russia, well, of course, Vladimir Putin would be deposed in an instant, crushed like an insect. And that's why nobody knows anything about Transnistria. It's kept from the public. But I can certainly relate. Of course, if I were given an opportunity to speak to him, I think that something could be accomplished. But that opportunity has never been provided yet.